The back room of the Casa Madrid restaurant at 171 North 25th Avenue in Melrose Park, Illinois, was not a place you ended up by choice. It was a place you were brought to. In the 1950s, this was the office of Salvador Battaglia, the Chicago outfit's most formidable loan shark. And his business was juice. He asked you with a growl, "Okay, where's the dough at?" As you begin to mumble an answer, Battaglia jumps up from his seat, looks you eye to eye, and he snarls, "Shut up, or I'll bust you in the teats."
Welcome back to James on the Mob. I'm James Jenkins, your host and narrator. In this episode, we dive into the life of Sam Teets Battaglia, the reluctant boss of the Chicago outfit. Teets, in the thick working-class accent of an Italian-American kid from Chicago's Patch neighborhood, it was his word for teeth. Shut up, or I'll punch you in the teeth. The threat was so raw, so direct, and so quintessentially him that the nickname stuck like cement shoes. And for the rest of his career, from street enforcer to the absolute boss of the Chicago outfit, he was Sam Teets Battaglia. His nickname was more than just a colorful moniker. It was his brand. In an organization filled with schemers and politicians, Sam Battaglia's brand was pure, unadulterated physical violence. This is the story of how a man whose entire reputation was built on such raw menace climbed the corporate ladder of the most powerful criminal organization in American history. Chicago's Patch neighborhood of the early 1900s was a microcosm of the immigrant experience, an overcrowded warren of low-rise flats and narrow cobblestone streets, where Sicilian, Neapolitan, and Irish dialects mixed freely with the cries of street vendors. Poverty was endemic and families often shared single rooms without plumbing or heat. Yet, even amid hardship, the sense of kinship and loyalty was unbreakable. The church steeples and ethnic clubs anchored community identity, while the city's political machine provided the illusion of stability through patronage and favors. From these same networks, criminal enterprises found fertile ground. In the Patch, gang leaders were not villains. They were local men who paid rent, sponsored festivals, and defended their own. This intersection of deprivation, ethnic pride, and pragmatic corruption was the soil from which the early Chicago outfit would eventually grow. It was in this environment that Salvador Battaglia was born on November 5th, 1908, to Italian immigrant parents amid the rapid urban expansion prior to the onset of Prohibition. He grew up on the near north side Patch neighborhood around Grand and Ogden Avenues, which produced many of Chicago's early organized crime figures. Around 1925, a new gang emerged from these slums. They were a collection of future syndicate heavyweights: Sam, Momo Giancana, Fiore, Fifi Buccieri, and the notoriously depraved Mad Sam DeStefano. They needed a name, and legend has it that in the display of youthful arrogance, they looked to classic literature. They decided that they were one better than Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. So they called themselves the 42 Gang. The 42 Gang was the unofficial farm team for Al Capone's Chicago outfit, a bloody training ground for the next generation. Their early curriculum was a bizarre mix of petty hooliganism and shocking brutality. They started by smashing peanut machines with sledgehammers for a handful of pennies and stealing bicycles from nicer neighborhoods like Oak Park. But they soon escalated to stealing horses from local fruit peddlers, sometimes killing the animals to sell the meat. This chaotic portfolio of crime, from petty theft to armed robbery to murder, was in fact the perfect on-the-job training for Sam Battaglia. The skills he learned with the 42ers, how to assess risk, how to use violence, and most importantly, how to get away with it, were directly transferable to the outfit. By 1930, Battaglia was ready for the big leagues. And on November 6th, he and two other thugs pulled off one of the most brazen robberies in Chicago history. Their target? Mary Walker Maisie Thompson, the wife of Chicago's larger-than-life mayor, Big Bill Thompson. As she walked into her apartment, they held her up, running off with $15,000 in jewelry. As a final insult, they also stole the gun and badge from her police chauffeur. Battaglia was brought to trial, but the chauffeur couldn't positively identify him. In a move that would become the theme of his career, Sam Battaglia walked. He had robbed the First Lady of Chicago and gotten away with it. The outfit was impressed. By the late 1930s, with Prohibition in memory, Battaglia had climbed the ranks and established himself as a formidable figure in the outfit's most reliable post-bootlegging enterprise, loan sharking. By the 1940s, Battaglia's center of operations were located in the western suburbs of Chicago, primarily Melrose Park and Franklin Park, Illinois. The syndicate's expansion from the city's core into the lucrative suburbs was not accidental. It was a calculated business strategy built on the backs of brutal enforcers and the local government facilitators who gave them a place to operate. Battaglia and Rocky DeGrazia, a mobster and proprietor whose primary contribution to the outfit was a building, the Casa Madrid. Also known as gumballs and hockey, DeGrazia was a mobster with a long history in the Chicago underworld. Starting as a driver for the Capone mob, he rose to become a gunman and gambling chief. DeGrazia was even reputed to have been in charge of accommodations for the shooters in the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. However, by the late 1940s and 50s, his stature had diminished. DeGrazia's sole remaining holding was the Casa Madrid, a lavish gambling club that also served as his residence. The relationship between Battaglia and DeGrazia was symbiotic and centered entirely on the Casa Madrid. Located in Melrose Park, Illinois, the establishment was on its face a restaurant and lounge. In reality, it was the headquarters for Battaglia's West Side and suburban operations. Over time, DeGrazia's role became even more subordinate. As his own criminal enterprises faltered, he became increasingly dependent on his relationship with Battaglia. By his later years, DeGrazia had dropped in stature, becoming a minor henchman of Sam Battaglia. The back room of the Casa Madrid was where Battaglia would hold court, deciding the fates of those who owed him money. It was a place where juice loan suckers would receive beatings that ranged from near fatal to lethal. The building itself was designed for illicit activity, featuring a former casino in the basement, secret staircases, and mirrored walls. The location was a favorite hangout for a host of other outfit figures, including Joey the Clown Lombardo, Joe Gags Gagliano, and Rocky Infelice. One of Battaglia's key subordinates was Rocco Prano, the outfit's muscle man and a brutish enforcer who ran the rackets in DuPage and Kane counties, and more closely in the nearby Chicago suburbs of North Lake and Stone Park, kicking up a share of the illicit profits to Battaglia. Prano reported directly to Battaglia and his boss, Sam Giancana, as well. Their relationship was all business, and that business would later be their downfall. Battaglia's reputation for violence grew with each broken bone and busted head. By 1950, his official criminal record was staggering. Unofficially, he was a suspect in at least 7 different homicides. He was seen by his peers and by law enforcement as a strong, aggressive, and capable enforcer, a man perfectly molded in the image of his violent predecessors. His close association with the outfit's rising star, Sam Giancana, positioned him as a future leader. He was an earner, an enforcer, and a man to be feared, a perfect combination for success in the Chicago underworld. By the late 1950s, Battaglia's reputation was so notorious that it reached the highest levels of government. In 1958, he was subpoenaed to appear in Washington, D.C. before the U.S. Senate Select Committee on Improper Activities in the Labor or Management Field, better known as the McClellan Committee. Identified as the Chicago Crime Syndicate's West Side manager, Battaglia faced a barrage of questions from the committee's aggressive chief counsel, Robert F. Kennedy. In a now infamous display of mob defiance, Battaglia pleaded the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution over 60 times, refusing to answer virtually any question. The Senate was not amused. They cited him for contempt, but for a man like Battaglia, that was a small price to pay to keep his mouth shut. In the brutal meritocracy of the Chicago outfit, power was never given, it was taken. For a generation of mobsters who came of age in the chaotic aftermath of Prohibition, the path to leadership was a treacherous climb over bodies and broken careers of their rivals. At the heart of this generational struggle were 2 men born from the same crucible of street-level violence, who would spend decades circling each other in a tense, often silent battle for control. Salvador Teets Battaglia and Fifi Buccieri. Both were graduates of the infamous 42 Gang, the violent farm team that bred a legion of future outfit leaders, including their contemporary, for a time, their supervisor, Sam Momo Giancana. They were brothers in brutality, men who had learned business of crime together in the slums of Chicago's Little Hell and the Patch. Yet, as they rose through the ranks, their shared history curdled into a quiet, simmering rivalry. This was not a public war fought with machine guns in the streets, but a cold internal power struggle that defined the outfit's command structure for nearly 2 decades. It was a contest of contrasting styles. Battaglia, the blunt instrument and master of the suburban juice racket, versus Buccieri, the designated Lord High Executioner and Giancana's personal enforcer. To understand the rivalry, one must first understand the men. Though forged in the same fire, Battaglia and Buccieri evolved into distinct types of Chicago mobster, each with a unique set of strengths and weaknesses that define their respective paths to power. Fifi Buccieri was a consummate insider, also a veteran of the 42 Gang and a specialist in loan sharking. His path to power was paved by his close association with Sam Giancana. While Battaglia was building his suburban empire, Buccieri was operating as Giancana's top enforcer and personal hitman, a role that earned him the chilling moniker, the Lord High Executioner from federal agents. His methods were legendarily cruel. He was a key participant in the most infamous outfit torture murder of loan shark collector William Action Jackson, who was hung on a meat hook and brutalized for 3 days before he finally died. Buccieri's strength was his proximity to the throne. As a trusted lieutenant to the boss, he wielded immense power and influence. His weakness, however, was that this power was largely derived from Giancana. He was a powerful subordinate, but not an independent operator in the same way as Battaglia. The seeds of the Battaglia-Buccieri rivalry were planted in the 1950s, a period of significant transition for the Chicago outfit. The organization's longtime low-profile leader, Anthony Joe Batters Accardo, began to strategically step back from the day-to-day operations to shield himself from increasing federal scrutiny. In 1957, he appointed Giancana as an acting boss. This still created a power vacuum, setting the stage for a prolonged struggle for power amongst the next generation of ambitious capos. Battaglia and Buccieri, both controlling lucrative West Side, city, and suburban territories, were natural competitors. The rivalry was largely a Cold War managed by the geographic separation of their operations and the overarching authority of Giancana and Accardo. Battaglia was the undisputed power in Melrose Park, operating out of the Casa Madrid, which was owned by his subordinate, Rocky DeGrazia. Buccieri, meanwhile, was a dominant force on the west side of Chicago, serving as Giancana's eyes and ears and frequently holding court at mob hangouts like the Dream Bar in Cicero. This division of territory prevented their simmering ambitions from boiling over into open conflict, which would have been bad for business and swiftly punished by the outfit's board of directors. The rivalry reached its climax in 1966. Sam Giancana, whose high-profile antics, palling around with Frank Sinatra, dating singer Phyllis McGuire, and drawing the ire of the Kennedy administration, had brought unprecedented federal heat on the outfit and was finally forced out. After a year in jail for contempt of court, Giancana fled to Mexico in 1966, leaving the boss's chair empty. The decision of who would succeed him fell to the old guard, Tony Accardo. And in a move that demonstrated his strategic genius, Accardo engineered a solution that would finally resolve the long-standing rivalry between his two top enforcers. He placed Battaglia in the top spot as the new front boss, but in a crucial balancing act, he named Fifi Buccieri as his underboss. The resolution, however, was short-lived. Battaglia, who had always been a street-level operator, proved ill-suited for the top job in an era of intense FBI pressure. FBI informant reports from the time paint a picture of a deeply insecure and reluctant leader. He was described as an unwilling frontman who feared the intense investigative attention that came with the title of boss. His indecisiveness led to serious factional disputes and a lack of strong leadership. He was also apparently incredibly cheap. One informant described him as the tightest guy he had ever come across. And despite being loaded with cash, Battaglia was still beating people in the teeth. He was personally seen chasing a small-time gambler halfway through Melrose Park over a minor debt, a task far below the station of a syndicate boss. He was a street soldier trying to run a criminal empire from his home at 1114 North Ridgeland Avenue in Oak Park, and it just wasn't working. The rivalry between Battaglia and Buccieri ultimately ended not with a bang, but with a whimper. Buccieri, the Lord High Executioner, was never brought down by a rival's bullet or a federal indictment. He died of cancer in 1973. That same year, Sam Battaglia was released from prison only to die of natural causes at his home shortly thereafter. While Battaglia was chasing down chump change, the federal government was closing in. They wouldn't get him for the 7 murders he was suspected of. Instead, they got him on something called the Hobbs Act, a federal law against obstructing interstate commerce. The case began in June of 1964. A developer named William G. Riley was building the King Arthur Apartments in Lansing, Illinois. But fearing mob interference, Riley told his superintendent, Dave Evans, to keep the project secret from the Melrose Park group. But Evans was the mob's guy on the inside. He leaked the project to mob lieutenant Joseph Joe Shine Amabile. Stone Park mobster Rocco Prano was tasked with the shakedown. They created a front company, Carlson Construction, headed by a, quote, clean, unquote, foreman named Henry Leakey. Amabile demanded a $20,000 kickback. When the numbers didn't add up, Amabile, meeting with Evans at his El Morocco Lounge in Northlake, Illinois, ordered Evans to inflate the contract, which he did, from $150,000 to nearly $200,000. The conspiracy went all the way up to the top. At a meeting at Battaglia's farm, Free Meadow Stock Farm, in Pine Tree Grove, Illinois, Prano confirmed the $20,000 was for Battaglia, who nodded and said, yes. That was the nail in Teets' coffin. In 1967, thanks to the testimony of insiders like Henry Leakey, Sam Teets Battaglia was convicted of violating the Hobbs Act and sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. His top lieutenants, Rocco Prano and Joe Shine Amabile, received the same sentence. The outfit's response was swift and brutal. Henry Leakey, who refused witness protection, was found in the trunk of a car on December 15, 1971. His body showed signs of extensive torture. With Battaglia in prison, the outfit's leadership was thrown into chaos. The job of boss fell to Felix Milwaukee Phil Aldericio, who himself was convicted of extortion by 1969. Sam Battaglia was released from prison in 1973. On September 7th of that year, the man who lived by such explosive violence died of natural causes at his home. He was 64 years old. So goes the story of Sam Teets Battaglia. He was a graduate of the streets, a product of the brutal education provided by the 42 gang. He rose through the ranks by mastering a single blue-collar racket, the business of fear. He was a figure caught between errors, trained in the open warfare of the Capone years, but forced to lead in a new age of intense, sophisticated federal scrutiny. His failure as a boss demonstrated that the old skills of violence and intimidation were no longer enough. The game had changed. He was ultimately brought down, not by a rival's bullet, but by the slow, methodical grind of the law, a conviction for obstructing the flow of commerce by extortion and threat. Sam Battaglia was never the flashiest boss, but in his brutal, simple, and direct approach to crime, he may have been one of the most honest representations of what the Chicago outfit truly was, a machine built on violence, powered by greed, and ultimately destined for the history books. And in the comments below, let me know your thoughts on Teets Battaglia, or who you'd like to see me cover in a future episode. I'm James Jenkins. If you've enjoyed this episode, or you know what to do, hit that thumb, subscribe, and share. And stay tuned for another episode of James on the Mob. And remember, life is short, so don't wag it off. See yous.